Hello, everybody. Good Sunday to you, or whatever day it is that you are coming across this video. I'm going to share today a reading from Alexander Dugin, and I'm pivoting a bit away from his political work right now, and we're going to be looking at some of his writings on orthodoxy. Specifically, he's got a book that's only partially translated entitled The Metaphysics of the Gospel, Orthodox Esotericism. And I'm excited to share with you guys in looking in his philosophical work. Going to be doing a video series on his Noomachia work, which is being translated by Michael Millerman and among others. So that will probably be released next week, maybe even tomorrow. But since it's Sunday here, and a lot of people have been asking about Alexander Dugin's specific views, since he is an Orthodox, Eastern Orthodox Christian, I figured this might be a good reading to share with you guys. So I will share my screen here. Let me know what you guys think in the comments. All right. So this is The Metaphysics of the Gospel, Orthodox Esotericism. And we're going to look at the table of contents here. You see that there's only maybe 3-4 chapters that have been translated. Here are the table of contents, right? Chapter 1, Christian Metaphysics, the Essence of the Problem. Part 1, the Metaphysics of Orthodox Dogma. 3 aspects of the metaphysical absolute, the apophatic trinity, the world of divine energies, the eternal cave of creation, between manifestation and creation, Bereshit bara Elohim, the separation of the waters, the freedom of the creature, and the choice of angels, paradisal Adam and fallen Adam, the metaphysics of incarnation. Part 2, God became flesh, the evil demiurge, the freedom of the New Testament, salvation and or deification. Part 3 is the metaphysical aspect of the Dormition of the Mother of God, the head of the angels, the Immaculate and Barbello, the Virgin Mary and spiritual realization. He led me to the banquet hall. Part 4, the initiatic meaning of Christian mysteries, the mysteries of the Eastern and Western churches, the Protestant question, the meaning of initiation, born again, the lesser mysteries, the royal priesthooding, the great mysteries, the rank of Melchizedek, the Eucharist and liturgy, the pneumatic aspect of confession, the mystery of marriage, the soteriological function of women, the monastic path and the transcendence of love, the seraphim mystery, anointment, the consuming fire. Part 4, the Christian year, the metaphysics of the year, the great cycle, Orthodox time, the symbolism of the cross, 2 mountains, the Russian year and Orthodox tradition, the summer chariot of Elijah and the prophet, the polar Pareskeva Friday, the calendric aspiration of creation. Part 4 or 6, actually, the symbolism of apostolic rank, the 3 fences of the heavenly church, the legacies of Peter and Paul, Judea, Israel, and counter initiation. Part 7, reign and kingdom, saints and warriors, the symphony of powers, theocracy and tyranny, Byzantium, Catacon, and the 1,000-year kingdom. On the Third Rome, which she has translated here, the brief era of sovereign withholder, let the kingdom come. Part 8, Christianity and eschatology, the first times, the end times, the Pistis Sophia, there shall be no time no longer, the 8th day, kenosis and eschatology, to become a son of thunder, the testament of Orthodox metaphysics, the called, the chosen, and alienation, the trumpet, and then the appendices, the burning bush, the Dormition of the Mother of God, which is translated, and we will read the Word of Elijah. And I'm currently reading this chapter, We Are the Church of the End Times, which is rather long. So I'm going to save that one for maybe another time. But we're going to start here with chapter 1, which is translated. Again, here is the icon of the Dormition of the Mother of God. You see here we have Christ. And in his hand, he is holding the Virgin Mary. And here is his mother at her deathbed as she reposed. We have the saints surrounding the cherubim up here. So we're going to discuss this in that section of the reading, but we're going to start with Christian metaphysics, the essence of the problem. And again, this is relatively short here. So here we go. This is, again, authored by Alexander Dugin, translator Jaffe Arnold, from November 5th, 2017. All right, let's begin. Christianity is the tradition whose metaphysical dimension has been studied least of all. This is quite a paradox, since one would think that such a deep study of Christianity, the religion of the West, would attract all those interested in metaphysics and who, following Guénon, are trying to make sense of the most profound aspects of tradition. Nevertheless, the disputes surrounding Christianity in traditionalist circles are, as a rule, limited to fairly secondary, practical issues regarding the virtual initiation of the sacraments, the absence of an idea of cyclical time, etc. In all of this, one can see a tacit consensus among traditionalists that Christianity is nothing more than a reduced, incomplete tradition whose esotericism has been practically lost and whose metaphysical content cannot be detached from the dense veil of exoteric scholastic theology and the hazy subjective intuitions of mystics. All attempts to identify any consistency between the basic principles of Christianity and the conceptual categories of other more metaphysically developed traditions, primarily Hinduism, have yielded rather poor results and have been based on strained interpretations and biased urges to arrive at any cost at conclusions which match Guénon's own ideas. This is the clearest of all of the book by Abbot Henri Stéphane. These circumstances, however, can be explained quite simply. The problem is that the Guénonian approach has spread only in narrow circles of the intellectual elite of the West, whereby Christianity is usually understood in the best case, Catholicism. But the specificity of Catholicism is such that from the moment that the Western Church fell away from the Eastern Church, Catholicism built its dogmatic and intellectual foundation on a conscious rejection of the metaphysical content of Christianity. Quite a claim there. All the scholastic constructs were essentially an ambition to develop a slender theological doctrine while completely ignoring the ontological and metaphysical elements, which were in fact present in the Christian tradition before the schism and preserved even afterwards. Of course, they survived exclusively in the Eastern Church, i.e. the bosom of Orthodoxy, but Catholics and even the most profound among them seem to be unaware of this. I believe he wrote this in 1999. I'm not exactly sure. Orthodoxy, for its part, despite having preserved ontological and metaphysical wholeness from a certain time onward, could no longer assert its metaphysical content, actual Christian metaphysics, in clear categories. Short after the Palamite disputes, when Orthodox Esotericism experienced its last dazzling rise in history, this line was somewhat marginalized and frozen as priority was given to the exoteric sides of the church. In the late 19th and 20th centuries, many Russian theologians and even secular philosophers, intuitively surmising the special metaphysical nature of orthodoxy, attempted to formulate certain principles for reviving the forgotten dimension of this tradition. However, most of these attempts did not yield serious results, since none of them were familiar with the works of Guénon. Hence why only now, in our opinion, is it possible to acquire adequate knowledge of the most important proportions of the structure of fully fledged metaphysics. It can be said that although Western traditionalists had the intellectual apparatus developed by Guénon, they did not have an adequate object for applying such, since Catholicism fundamentally prohibits one from going from the exoteric to the esoteric and metaphysical levels, and moreover places insurmountable obstacles along the way. The Orthodox had and have a fully fledged object, the Orthodox Christian church tradition, and a full, irreducible dogma, but they have hitherto lacked an adequate metaphysical apparatus. Thus, for two opposite reasons, both in West and East, the most widespread, well-known, familiar, and close tradition, Christianity, has remained the most unknown, mysterious, and closed, all the while as traditionalists rather well mastered Islamic metaphysics, Buddhism, Hinduism, Taoism, and even some archaic cults. The distant and exotic paradoxically became nearer to modern scholars nominally belonging to Christian civilization than, quote unquote, their own, the familiar and close. Be that as it may, Russians' first acquaintance with the ideas of Guénon now allow us to chart our way out of this impasse and to try to compare the overall metaphysical picture with the dogma of Orthodox Christianity. One should not be mistaken as to the simplicity of such a study. The near complete absence of references to orthodoxy among traditionalists' authorities makes this task extremely difficult and risky. Nevertheless, without claiming final truth on this matter, and all the while leaving the way open for alternative pursuits, we will try in this work to understand the metaphysical nature of orthodoxy and, as follows, arrive at a formulation and recognition of the essence of Christian metaphysics. That is the opening section. Please let me know what you think in the comments. And I said we're going to read one more section, which we will here. I've already read it, and it is quite beautiful. So I wanted to share it with you as well. The Dormition of the Mother of God. Here's the icon again. Note the juxtaposition between most icons of the Holy Mother of God, who is holding the Christ child in her hands. In this, we see Christ holding the infant mother in his hands, and this will become important here in a minute. All right, theological symbolism. The Dormition of the Mother of God is one of the most revered icons in Rus. It is this icon that was first miraculously delivered from Constantinople to Kiev, where it consecrated with its divine presence, not only the Kiev Petroresk Lavra, but all of Holy Rus, the new and final bastion of Orthodoxy. In the traditional depiction of this icon, we see on the lower veil the Virgin falling into slumber on her deathbed, surrounded by saints. And on the middle level, we see the figure of Jesus Christ standing, holding the soul of the Virgin Mary in the form of an infant in his hands. In considering the symbolism of this depiction, it is necessary to immediately point to the reverse analogy between the central figure of the Dormition of the Mother of God and the classical Mother of God icon. If the traditional depiction of the Mother of God, for example, the Vladimir Mother of God, Kazan Mother of God, etc., we see the adult Mother of God holding Jesus, then in the Dormition of the Mother of God, we see the inverse, the adult Jesus Christ and the infant Virgin Mary. Explaining this contrast will help us discover the universal ontological character of the Christian tradition, which, like any fully fledged tradition, in addition to a historical aspect, bears a deeply metaphysical, supra-historical charge directly tied to the spiritual understanding of reality at large. Thus, the very fact of the incarnation of the God Word in the material human universe necessarily implies a certain diminishment of the fullness of the second hypostasis of the Holy Trinity, not an essential depreciation. The Trinity always remains self-resembling, but an external, apparent, visible depreciation. Christ is described in the gospel as suffering. In the first coming, the true nature of the Son remains veiled, hidden, and can only be guessed by chosen disciples. But for subsequent generations of Christians, defining this divine nature becomes the basis of faith. Faith, not knowledge, since knowledge is associated with the ontological obviousness of a certain sacred fact, and the obviousness of the Son's divinity manifests itself only at the moment of the second coming, the coming of the sacred in power, in glory, i.e., in his original non-diminished quality. Wonder what you think of that. Therefore, the classical image of the Mother of God with the infant has a symbolic meaning that is central to prayer and church practice. In this icon, as in the sacred map of reality, a diminished spiritual center is shown surrounding by the human, or more broadly, material cosmic nature, which externally surpasses this center, is predominant compared to it, and is bigger than it is. The Mother of God with the infant describes the ontological status of the world between the first and second coming, where the Son is already revealed to the world, but in a diminished quality, thereby demanding faith, personal effort, and spiritual devotion on part of the believers for dynamic willed transformation of faith into confidence. Yeah. Sorry about that. The Dormition of the Mother of God icon presents us with the inverse proportion, rising above the concrete historical fact of the Virgin Mary's personal death. The Orthodox tradition here offers a prototype of an eschatological situation, valuable, pointing to the meaning of the sacraments of the end times. The depiction of Christ holding the infant Virgin in his arms describes the true proportions of the spiritual world in which the center, the pole of being, the God Word, is presented not as diminished, but in its full metaphysical extent. In the heavenly world, the diminished is the material reality, is the material, the earthly cosmic portion, while the spirit itself appears in its entirety. Here, the word is omnipresent and obvious and all fulfilling. But the material world is not simply destroyed in heavenly reality, it is transformed, it is drawn to the spiritual regions and rises to its heavenly and supramaterial archetype. Hence, in fact, the special term dormition, from the Greek geomesis, sleep, rest, lie in Latin assumptio, in contrast to the usual word death. Dormition means solace, i.e., the transition from the state of unrest inherent to material reality, to material physical reality, to the state of peace, in which all things abide in the regions of eternity. Thus, there is not destruction, but final disappearance, understood by the word death. It would be interesting in this regard to pay attention to the Russian etymology of the word uspeni, dormition, which is akin to the ancient Indian term svapiti, literally to sleep. This Indian term literally means to enter oneself or dive into one's inner self. As follows, our word uspini etymologically means entering the inner world being a synonym for the spiritual or heavenly world. In the Troparion for the celebration of the dormition of the Mother of God, it is said, "In falling asleep, she did not forsake the world." This refers not only to the compassionate participation of the Mother of God in worldly affairs after her departure, but also the fundamental ontological event of the casting of the material world into the spiritual sphere as a result of a special, unique, sacred event. What metaphysical event is symbolized by the dormition of God? The event is the end times. It is at this moment, the moment of the second coming, that happens the final affirmation of true spiritual proportions in correlation to the material and the spiritual. The material, the Virgin Mary, turns out to be the infinitesimal point in the infinity of spiritual light, the light of God Word, Christ. Consequently, the dormition icon reveals to the Christian the deep mystery of the end times, which is not a global catastrophe, not the destruction or disappearance of the physical world as seen most often by those who are only superficially familiar with Orthodox eschatology, but the essential and total restoration of the normal, natural, harmonious ways of being, where the spiritual heavenly light completely incorporates the physical material darkness. Therefore, from a Christian perspective, the end times is the single most important event of an entirely positive salvational meaning. The end times is not a catastrophe, but the end of catastrophe, since from a spiritual point of view, any unrest, worrying, or movement is essentially catastrophic for the spirit, and in addition signifies the triumph of inferior satanic forces. The end times, the end of the world, the judgment day, act as something repulsive and negative only for the enemies of God, only for those who identify their fate with a dark course of restless demonic fate. For believers, on the contrary, this is salvation, a celebration, a transformation, the universal and final dormition of matter together with universal and final awakening of the spirit. Curious as to what you think about this section here. Thus, we can now distinguish three levels in the spiritual teaching manifesting such abundant wisdom in the icon of the dormition. One, historically, this icon tells of the death of the mother of our Lord Jesus Christ and her subsequent mercy for the believers and suffering world. Two, ontologically, it embodies the affirmation of true spiritual proportions of material reality in the larger picture of being, where the spirit fills everything, while physical reality is diminished to an infinitely small point. Eschatologically, it points to the meaning of the end times, i.e., the restoration of true existential proportions and the affirmation of the absolute triumph of the heavenly divine element. The diminishing of matter in the end times does not mean its destruction, but its induction into the fullness of light and peace. Last section here, universal symbolism. The symbolism of the dormition icon, if we juxtapose it to the Mother of God icon, also his analogies outside of the Christian context. The clearest such similar spiritual concept of the structure of being is reflected in the Chinese symbol of yin yang, in which the white dot against the black background signifies the diminishing of the spirit in matter, while the black dot against the white background is conversely matter and spirit. However, the Chinese tradition is characterized by contemplation and the absence of an eschatological orientation. Thus, the Chinese are inclined to consider this symbol as a sign of eternal harmony, while Christians see ontological plans in a historical and eschatological perspective. Hence, Christianity's distinctly dynamic character, supposing the personal, volitional engagement of man and the outcome of the fate of the spirit. The Chinese believe that this volitional aspect is not so important insofar as the Tao ultimately arranges everything in the best way. Undoubtedly, similar symbolism can be found in many other traditions in reference to the correlations between the material and spiritual worlds, but the Chinese example represents something so clear and comprehensive that all similar parables can be reduced to it. Okay, there's more here actually. Last section here is on the sacred sign of Russia. The fact that the icon of the Dormition of the Mother of God was first to be miraculously brought to Russia, and the fact that its presence graced the Kiev Petrorask Lavra, which was the first center for the spread of Orthodoxy in Russia, leaves one to believe that Russia is under the special patronage of this icon. The Russian Orthodox tradition and Russian Church believe this. If we take into account all of the theological and ontological as well as eschatological content of this icon's message, then it is not only natural to associate it with the sacred mission and spiritual fate of Russia itself. On the historical level, such symbolism applied to Russia points to the constant participation of the Mother of God in the history of the Russian state, not only during the period of its fully fledged Orthodox existence, but also during the dark periods of neglect and decline. As if it were a fulfillment of predestination that began with the spread of Orthodox faith throughout Russian lands approximately over 1,000 years following the founding of the Kiev Petrorask Lavra to the moment of the collapse of the Orthodox order in Russia. The Mother of God was a believer and declared that henceforth she takes responsibility for Russia and sovereign power therein. The icon known as the Sovereign is dedicated to this, and in falling asleep, she did not forsake the world. On an ontological level, our symbolism might very well explain the cultural and psychological specificity of Russian Orthodox civilization, which was also always contemplatively oriented, drawn by the spirit to the heavenly sphere, where true proportions are set out once and for all, while sometimes neglecting earthly, practical, material things, which seemed to the religious consciousness of Russians to be just as infinitesimal as the tiny figure of the Mother of God in the hands of the Savior. Interesting symbolism there. Finally, on the eschatological level, the idea of Russia's mission being tied to the end times is clearly present in Orthodox thought, hence in particular the rise of the idea of Moscow as the third Rome or last Rome, who is destined to stand until the final moment of earthly history. And the Dormition icon ontologically describes the ideal essence of the Russian Orthodox soul. Then in eschatological terms, it points to the active side of Russian civilization, the mission it is destined to fulfill in human history. This mission is without a doubt connected to the realization of the end times and the providential preparation of the second coming. It is also important to recall the omens sent to St. Anthony of Kiev before the construction of the first and main temple of the Kiev Petrorask Lavra in honor of the Dormition of the Holy Mother of God. Anthony prayed to God to send him a sign pointing to the place where the church should be built. In the morning, all of the ground was covered with dew, but in one place, the earth was left completely dry. The next day, the miracle was repeated, but in reverse order. The dew was nowhere to be found other than in the place where there had been no dew the day before. Finally, when the saint was gathering firewood, fire rained down from the sky and set it alight. After this, no doubts remained as to the place to be chosen. All three of these miracles have a strictly symbolic and doctrinal interpretation connected to the spiritual meaning of the Dormition. The dry place of the future church in the middle of the dew-covered space is symbolically identical to the icon of the Mother of God, in which the fiery, dry, light element, Christ, is surrounded by the wet, earthly element, the Virgin Mary. The next day, the opposite occurs, which is the essence of the Dormition icon, in which the dryness, fireness, spirituality of the earth surrounds a small, wet space, matter. The third miracle directly concerns the secret of the end times, when the prepared firewood, the church and true believers, will be lit on fire and transfigured by heavenly light force, the force of the second coming. In this mysterious story of the founding of Kiev Petrovrad Lavra is captured the deepest prophecy of the fate of Russia, the fate of Christianity and Orthodoxy, and its glorious and great future. All right, so there you have it. Love to hear your thoughts, and please be on the lookout for the next video next week. So thanks, everybody. God bless.